At dinner with my mother-in-law, I overheard my husband call me temporary. He didn't know I recorded everything. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. You know, there are words that change everything. They fall into your life like a stone into still water, and the ripples spread to the very edges of your existence. For me, that word was temporary. But let me start from the beginning. We met in a bookstore. I was reaching for a copy of The Great Gatsby when his hand brushed mine on the same book. He smiled and said, "Great minds think alike." David was everything I thought I wanted. Tall, confident, with dark hair that always looked perfectly tousled and eyes that seemed to see right through me. He wore expensive suits even on weekends and drove a BMW that smelled like leather and ambition. When he asked me to coffee that day, I felt like I'd won some cosmic lottery. Our courtship was a whirlwind of expensive restaurants, weekend getaways, and late-night conversations that made me feel like the most fascinating woman alive. He would listen to me talk about my job at the nonprofit with what seemed like genuine interest, ask thoughtful questions about my dreams, and make me feel like my opinion mattered in ways no one ever had before. "You're different, Sarah," he would say, tucking a strand of my brown hair behind my ear. "You're real, not like those other women who only care about money and status." I should have paid attention to how he talked about other women. But I was too busy basking in the glow of being the exception. 6 months later, he proposed. The ring was perfect, the proposal movie-worthy. Candle-lit dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first real date, down on one knee with tears in his eyes. "I can't imagine my life without you," he said, and I believed him completely. We married the following spring in a ceremony his mother orchestrated with military precision. I remember feeling overwhelmed by the guest list. So many of his colleagues and family friends I'd never met, while my side of the church looked sparse by comparison. But David squeezed my hand during the vows and whispered, "It's just us that matters," and everything else faded away. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, but isn't it always? David worked long hours at his law firm, gunning for partner before 35. I understood. I supported him. When he came home stressed and snappy, I learned to give him space. When he criticized my cooking or suggested I might want to upgrade my wardrobe now that I was Mrs. David Harrison, I told myself he was trying to help me fit into his world. "Image matters in my line of work," he would say, not unkindly. "We're a team now. We represent each other." So I quit my job at the animal rescue nonprofit and took a position at a corporate foundation. The pay was better, the offices cleaner, the work more prestigious, and infinitely less fulfilling. I told myself it was temporary. The changes came gradually, like erosion, so slowly that by the time I noticed, the landscape of our marriage had already shifted beyond recognition. It started with small things, comments that stung just enough to notice, but not enough to confront. "Sarah's always been more of a humanities person," he would say, when I struggled to follow conversations about investment portfolios at dinner parties. The words came with a smile, but something cold lived behind his eyes. "She's very earnest," he told his colleague's wife when she complimented a dress I'd worn to their anniversary party. "Earnest. Like it was a disease." The bedroom became a place of polite scheduling rather than passion. Tuesday nights, sometimes Sunday mornings if he wasn't golfing. Efficient and distant, like everything else in our increasingly sterile life together. When I suggested we take a cooking class together or plan a camping trip like we used to, he would look at me with barely concealed irritation. "We're not college kids anymore, Sarah. We have responsibilities." But he had time for drinks with colleagues, time for weekend golf tournaments, time for his mother's endless social obligations. Eleanor Harrison was a force of nature wrapped in Chanel suits and passive aggression. She had never liked me, though she was too well bred to say so directly, Instead, she deployed 1,000 tiny cuts. "Oh, you're wearing that?" When I showed up to family gatherings. David always dated such sophisticated women before, usually followed by a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. I suppose not everyone can come from the right kind of family. David never defended me, not once. He would just give me that look, the one that said I was being too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. "That's just how Mother is," he would say later. "She doesn't mean anything by it." But I began to suspect she meant everything by it. The worst part wasn't the comments themselves. It was how I started to see myself through their eyes. The confident woman who had attracted David in that bookstore began to disappear, replaced by someone constantly second-guessing herself. I found myself checking my reflection obsessively before family gatherings, rehearsing conversations, trying to anticipate where I might stumble next. I gained weight. Not much, maybe 10 pounds, but enough for David to notice. He started making helpful suggestions about gym memberships and maybe cutting back on carbs. Nothing cruel, nothing I could call abusive, just a steady stream of gentle corrections that left me feeling like I was slowly disappearing. "I'm just looking out for your health," he would say when I got defensive. "Don't you want to look your best?" The thing about gaslighting is that it works so gradually, you don't notice it happening. One day, you're a confident woman with opinions and dreams, and the next you're asking permission to buy groceries and apologizing for taking up space. I started keeping a journal, not because I planned anything, but because I needed somewhere to put all the words I couldn't say out loud. Pages and pages of confusion, of trying to make sense of why I felt so small in my own life. "Had dinner with Eleanor tonight?" I wrote after a particularly brutal evening. She asked David, right in front of me, when he was going to settle down with someone more suitable. He laughed, actually laughed, then spent the rest of dinner talking about his ex-girlfriend Rebecca and how she'd just made partner at her firm. I excused myself to the bathroom and cried. When I came back, they were discussing which wines would be appropriate for the partners' dinner next month. Like I wasn't even there. The partners' dinner. God, that was another humiliation entirely. David had been selected to host it at our house, a huge honor that could make or break his promotion prospects. He'd hired a catering company, arranged for professional servers, even had our living room furniture rearranged by an interior designer. "This is our chance to really impress them," he said, pacing around the kitchen while I tried to stay out of the way. "Everything has to be perfect." I asked what I should wear. "Something simple," he said without looking at me. "Classic. Don't try to be the center of attention." The night of the dinner, I wore a navy blue dress that cost more than my car payment and made me feel like I was playing dress-up. I smiled and nodded and asked polite questions about golf handicaps and vacation homes. When someone complimented the food, David took credit for selecting the caterer. When they admired our art collection, he launched into detailed explanations about each piece without mentioning that half of them had been my choices. I was a ghost in my own home. But it was later that night, when I was cleaning up forgotten wine glasses and crumpled napkins, that I overheard the conversation that would change everything. David was on the phone with his mother, thinking I was upstairs. "I think it went well," he was saying. "Johnson seemed impressed with the house, and Patricia loved the flowers." A pause. "Sarah?" "She was fine. Kept quiet, didn't embarrass us. Though I did notice her talking to Patricia about that animal rescue thing again. I've told her not to bring that up at these events." Another pause, longer this time. "No, Mother, I know what you're thinking, but it's not that simple. The timing isn't right yet. I need to make partner first, get established. She's temporary, a placeholder until I figure out what I really want." Temporary. The word hit me like a physical blow. I had to grip the kitchen counter to keep from falling over. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he would hear it from the next room. Temporary. Placeholder. 3 years of marriage, and I was just a fucking placeholder. I stood there in my expensive dress, surrounded by the debris of a party thrown to advance my husband's career, and realized that I had been living a lie. Not just telling myself lies, but living inside one, breathing it, becoming it. The phone conversation continued, but I couldn't hear it over the rushing sound in my ears. I walked upstairs on shaking legs and sat on the edge of our bed, staring at nothing. How long had I been temporary? Had I ever been anything else? I thought about all the signs I had ignored, all the small cruelties I had explained away, all the times I had made myself smaller to fit into his vision of the perfect wife. The perfect temporary wife. That night, lying next to him while he slept peacefully, I made a decision. If I was temporary, it was time to start acting like it. Temporary things could be discarded easily. They could also disappear without much notice. I started paying attention differently, really paying attention. I began to see patterns I had trained myself to ignore. David kept his phone face down at dinner and took calls in his study with the door closed. He worked late more often, but his pay stubs didn't show overtime. He started going to networking events on weekends that somehow never led to any professional opportunities he wanted to share with me. I hired a private investigator. Her name was Maria Santos, and she was the opposite of what I expected, a middle-aged Latina woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. I paid her in cash from the household account David never bothered to check because financial management was too boring for me to handle properly. "Honey," Maria said after our first meeting, "in 30 years of doing this job, I've learned to spot the cheaters in the first 5 minutes of conversation. Your husband, he's textbook." She was right. Within 2 weeks, she had photographs of David having lunch with a blonde woman who definitely wasn't discussing legal briefs. Rebecca Morrison, senior partner at Kellerman Associates, the same Rebecca that Eleanor had mentioned so admiringly. David's ex-girlfriend, who had recently gotten divorced from her investment banker husband. The photos were damning, but not surprising. What surprised me was how little I felt looking at them. No devastation, no betrayal, just a cold satisfaction that my instincts had been right. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was just married to a liar. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. I had learned patience in this marriage, learned to observe and plan. If David thought I was temporary, he was about to discover just how right he was. I started documenting everything. Every cruel comment, every dismissive gesture, every lie about where he'd been. I kept copies of financial records, photographed important documents, and started building a case that would make his life very complicated when the time came. The dinner at Eleanor's was scheduled for a Tuesday in October. David had mentioned it casually, the way he mentioned all obligations that involved me as decoration rather than participant. His uncle was visiting from Boston, some celebration I wasn't expected to understand or care about. I almost didn't go. The thought of sitting through another evening of Eleanor's pointed comments and David's casual dismissal made me feel sick. But something told me this might be important. Maybe it was intuition, or maybe I just needed to see how bad it could get. I wore the black dress David liked, the one that made me look appropriate. I did my makeup carefully and straightened my hair until it hung smooth and unremarkable down my back. I looked exactly like what I was, a placeholder wife trying not to take up too much space. The dinner was as excruciating as expected. Eleanor had outdone herself, with china that probably cost more than most people's cars and flower arrangements that looked like they belonged in a museum. Uncle Charles was a louder, more pompous version of David, full of stories about his success and opinions about everyone else's failures. I smiled and nodded and made appropriate responses when directly addressed, which wasn't often. Mostly I was ignored, which had become my default state in family gatherings. The invisible woman at the end of the table. It was when Eleanor went to get dessert that I excused myself to find the bathroom. Their house was enormous, and I had gotten lost before, but this time I knew where I was going. What I didn't expect was to hear David's voice coming from Eleanor's study as I passed the half-open door. He was on his phone again, pacing in front of the window. "I know, Rebecca, I know, but I can't just leave her right now. The optics would be terrible with the partnership decision coming up." My hand found the door frame, steadying myself. She's not stupid, but she's not paying attention either, too wrapped up in her little feelings to notice what's really going on. A laugh, cold and dismissive. "Mother thinks I should wait until after I make partner to make any big changes. Keep the stable marriage image for now. Sarah's useful for that at least. She looks the part, doesn't cause trouble. I should have walked away, should have pretended I hadn't heard. Instead, I found myself pulling out my phone, hands shaking as I started the voice recorder app. Some instinct told me this was important, that I needed proof of what I was hearing. The thing is, Rebecca, she's temporary. She was always temporary. I just needed someone safe and uncomplicated while I got established. Someone who wouldn't ask too many questions or make demands. My heart stopped. There it was again. That word that had been haunting me for months. No, she doesn't suspect anything. She's too insecure to think I might be seeing someone like you, someone with actual ambition and intelligence. The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This was my husband, the man who had promised to love and honor me, talking about me like I was furniture he was planning to replace. I've been thinking about how to handle it, David continued. Maybe after the partnership comes through, make it look like we grew apart, incompatible differences, that sort of thing. If I handle it right, I might even come out looking sympathetic. The successful lawyer whose wife couldn't keep up with his world. I stood there recording, my thumb steady on the phone screen even though the rest of me was shaking. Every word was being captured, stored, saved for the moment when I would need it. "She'll be fine," David said, and I could hear him moving around the room. "Sarah's resilient. She'll find some nice, boring guy who appreciates her earnest little do-gooder routine. Meanwhile, you and I can finally be together properly. No more sneaking around." Rebecca must have said something encouraging, because David laughed again, that same cold sound I had been hearing for months without recognizing what it meant. "I love you too," he said, and the words hit me like a slap. When was the last time he had said that to me? When was the last time he had meant it? I heard footsteps coming back down the hall and quickly slipped into the bathroom, closing the door quietly behind me. My reflection in the mirror looked stranger to me than ever, pale, shocked, but somehow more alive than I had felt in years. I had evidence now. Proof that I wasn't imagining things, that the slow erosion of my marriage wasn't my fault or my failure. David had planned this. I was temporary by design. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. I sat at that table, eating Eleanor's perfect tiramisu and making polite conversation about the weather, while the recording burned like a secret in my phone. David played the attentive husband, touching my hand occasionally, including me in conversations with the same patronizing tone he always used. "Sarah's been thinking about getting more involved in charity work," he said when Uncle Charles asked what I did with my time. "Haven't you, darling?" I smiled and nodded, playing my part one last time, just trying to find the right fit. "She has such a good heart," David said, squeezing my hand, "sometimes too good for her own good." Eleanor made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been indigestion. Uncle Charles launched into a story about a charity golf tournament. I sat there and let it all wash over me, protected by the knowledge that this was the last time I would have to pretend. That night, David fell asleep quickly, exhausted by the performance of being a loving husband. I lay awake next to him, listening to him breathe, and planned my next move. I had the recording, but I needed more. Evidence of the affair, documentation of our assets, proof of everything I would need to protect myself when this marriage finally ended. Because it would end, one way or another. If David thought I was temporary, he was about to learn that temporary could work both ways. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own life. I hired Maria for more surveillance, copied financial documents when David was at work, and began assembling a dossier that would make any divorce attorney smile. The affair with Rebecca was extensive and sloppy. Hotel receipts charged to credit cards I had access to, restaurant bills for two when David claimed to be working late, even a weekend trip to Napa that he had passed off as a legal conference. For someone who prided himself on being clever, David was remarkably careless about covering his tracks. More importantly, I discovered that David had been hiding assets. Money moved into accounts I didn't know about, investments made without my knowledge, even a small property purchased under his name alone while we were married. In our state, that made it community property, something I was sure he had forgotten in his eagerness to prepare for his post-Sarah future. I consulted with 3 different attorneys before choosing Jennifer Walsh, a shark in a silk suit who specialized in high-asset divorces. She looked over my evidence with the hunger of a predator who had just spotted wounded prey. "This is comprehensive," she said, spreading photos and documents across her desk. "Your husband made some very expensive mistakes. The hidden assets alone will make this interesting, but the recording..." That's going to change everything. I wanted to wait until after Christmas. Something about ruining the holidays felt too cruel, too petty. But David made the decision for me when he announced, 2 days before Thanksgiving, that he would be working through the weekend. "Big case heating up," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sorry, sweetheart. I know you were looking forward to the Hartley's party." The Hartley's party, where Rebecca would also be in attendance, according to the guest list I had seen on Eleanor's Facebook page. That night, I called my sister Emma for the first time in months. She was the only person who had ever questioned my marriage to David, who had looked skeptical when I gushed about our whirlwind romance and expensive wedding. "Sarah," she said when she heard my voice, "are you okay? You sound different." "I'm getting divorced," I said, and the words felt powerful in my mouth. There was a long pause. "Thank God," Emma said finally. "I've been waiting 3 years for you to realize what an asshole he is." We talked for hours that night. Emma helped me plan the final confrontation, offering to be there for moral support and witness if needed. She had always been the stronger one, the sister who spoke her mind and refused to shrink herself for anyone's comfort. "You know what pisses me off most?" Emma said as we were ending the call. "He made you think you were the problem, that you weren't good enough, smart enough, sophisticated enough. Fuck that. You're worth 10 of him." I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone in my corner. The partner decision came through the Monday before Christmas. David burst through the front door with champagne and the kind of genuine smile I hadn't seen from him in years. "I got it," he said, sweeping me into a hug that felt more like a performance than an embrace. "Senior partner at Morrison, Kellerman Associates." Morrison, Rebecca's firm. How convenient. We celebrated that night with expensive wine and takeout from David's favorite restaurant. He was charming and attentive in a way that reminded me of our early days together, and for a moment I almost felt sad about what was coming. This was the man I had fallen in love with, before the mask slipped and revealed the stranger underneath. "This changes everything," David said over dinner, and I knew he meant more than just his career. "We're going to have a very different life now." He had no idea how different. I waited until New Year's Eve. David was getting ready for the party at Eleanor's, the annual celebration where he could finally announce his partnership to the extended family and social circle he valued more than his actual wife. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, I had to admit. Still the same man who had made my heart race in that bookstore 5 years ago. But now I could see what I had missed then, the coldness behind his charm, the calculation in his smile. "You look beautiful," he said, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror. I was wearing the emerald green dress he had bought me for Christmas, his idea of an appropriate gift for the temporary wife who still had a role to play. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it. I did feel beautiful that night, powerful, ready. The party was everything I expected, elegant, expensive, and filled with people who had never bothered to learn my name. I made small talk and accepted compliments on my dress and watched David hold court with his success story, the proud husband, the perfect couple, the American dream in miniature. It was almost midnight when I made my move. "Could I have everyone's attention?" I called out, tapping a champagne flute with a knife until the room fell quiet. David looked surprised but pleased, probably assuming I was going to make some touching speech about his achievement. "I wanted to thank everyone for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "It's been such a special year for David and me, so many changes, so many revelations." David smiled and raised his glass, still not sensing danger. "I thought this would be the perfect time to share something with all of you, something that really captures the spirit of our marriage." I pulled out my phone, heart hammering as I navigated to the recording I had transferred and saved in 3 different places. David gave me such a beautiful gift this year. The gift of honesty. I thought you might all like to hear it. The recognition dawned on David's face just as I hit play. His voice filled the elegant silence of his mother's living room, clear and cruel and unmistakably his. She's temporary. She was always temporary. I just needed someone safe and uncomplicated while I got established. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of David's voice explaining exactly how temporary I was, how useful I had been as a placeholder, how much he was looking forward to replacing me with Rebecca once the partnership was secure. When the recording ended, the silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. David's face had gone white, then red, then a mottled combination that made him look like he was choking. "Sarah," he started, but I held up my hand. "I'm not finished," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "See, the thing about being temporary is that it works both ways. You thought you were managing me, planning your exit strategy, but you forgot something important." I looked around the room at all the shocked faces, at Eleanor gripping her pearls like they might save her, at Uncle Charles with his mouth hanging open like a fish. Temporary things can disappear without much notice. I pulled out the envelope I had been carrying in my purse all evening and handed it to David. His hands shook as he opened it and scanned the divorce papers inside. "You've been served," I said, borrowing a phrase from the legal dramas I had been watching to prepare for this moment. "Jennifer Walsh from Walsh Associates will be in touch with your attorney. I assume you'll want to hire one who doesn't work at your new firm, given the circumstances." The whole room was staring now, a captive audience for the final act of our marriage. David looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and Eleanor looked like she might faint into her hors d'oeuvres. "One more thing," I said, pulling out my phone again. "Rebecca, I know you're here somewhere. This next recording is especially for you." I hit play on the second file, the one where David described in detail how he planned to leave his insecure wife for someone with actual ambition and intelligence. The one where he talked about making our divorce look like my fault, painting himself as the victim of an incompatible marriage. Rebecca, who had been trying to blend into the wallpaper near the bar, looked like she wanted to crawl under the Persian rug. "Now," I said, addressing the room like the audience they had become, "I'm going to leave you all to enjoy the rest of your party. David, your things will be packed and waiting by the front door when you get home. I've changed the locks, so don't bother trying your key." I set my champagne glass down on the nearest table and walked toward the door, my heels clicking against Eleanor's marble floors like a countdown to freedom. "Sarah, wait!" David called after me, finally finding his voice. "We can work this out. It's not what it sounded like." I turned back to face him one last time. "You're right," I said. "It's exactly what it sounded like. You said I was temporary, David. Congratulations. You got exactly what you wanted." The last thing I heard as I walked out of Eleanor Harrison's house was the sound of 30 people starting to talk at once, their shocked voices rising like a flock of startled birds. Emma was waiting outside in her car, engine running. She had been my getaway driver for the evening, ready to whisk me away from the scene of my liberation. "How do you feel?" she asked as I slid into the passenger seat. I thought about it for a moment, taking inventory of my emotions. Relief, certainly. Satisfaction at a plan well executed. But underneath it all, something I hadn't expected. Lightness. Like I had been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there until I finally set it down. "Free," I said finally. "I feel free." The divorce took 8 months to finalize. Jennifer Walsh proved to be worth every penny of her exorbitant fees, turning David's hidden assets and affair into a settlement that left me financially secure and emotionally vindicated. The recording became the star exhibit in our case, proof of David's intent to deceive and his systematic emotional abuse. David tried to fight it at first, claiming the recording had been obtained illegally, that I had violated his privacy. But as Jennifer pointed out, I had been standing in a hallway of my mother-in-law's house, and David had been speaking loud enough to be overheard. No reasonable expectation of privacy, and certainly no legal grounds for suppression. More importantly, the recording opened doors to other evidence. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts to Rebecca. Credit card statements revealing their affair in expensive detail. Financial documents that proved David had been systematically hiding marital assets in preparation for his planned departure. Rebecca tried to distance herself from the whole mess, claiming she hadn't known David was still married when their relationship resumed. But the hotel receipts and romantic getaways dating back over a year told a different story. Her firm quietly suggested she might want to look for opportunities elsewhere, and David's promotion to senior partner was put on indefinite hold pending the resolution of his personal matters. The social fallout was swift and brutal. The recording had been shared widely before the night was over, and David went from rising star to cautionary tale in the space of a week. Eleanor tried to salvage the family reputation, but the damage was done. At every country club lunch and charity gala, people would whisper and point. The man who had called his wife temporary, who had planned her replacement like a corporate restructuring. I moved back to my hometown, bought a small house near the lake where Emma and I had spent our childhood summers. I took a job with a local animal rescue, returning to the work that had always made me feel purposeful. The pay was terrible, but I didn't need much now. David's hidden assets had become my financial security. Poetic justice that left me laughing every time I checked my bank balance. Sometimes I run into people who knew us as a couple, who remember me as David's quiet wife. They always look surprised to see me now, like they're trying to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the person standing in front of them. Confident, happy, taking up exactly as much space as I deserve. "You look different," they always say, and I suppose I do. I look like someone who knows her own worth. The final irony came 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Maria, my private investigator, called with an update I hadn't requested, but found deeply satisfying. David and Rebecca had gotten engaged, a quiet ceremony with no announcement in the society pages. But their relationship was already showing stress fractures, possibly because building a romance on the wreckage of a marriage isn't the strongest foundation. "He's hiring PIs to investigate her," Maria told me, amusement clear in her voice. "Thinks she might be cheating with someone from her new firm." I couldn't help but laugh. Once a cheater, always suspicious. David had learned to trust no one, probably because he knew better than anyone how easy it was to lie to someone who loved you. I never remarried. Not because I'm damaged or afraid, but because I learned something valuable in that wreckage. I don't need anyone else to complete me. I'm not temporary, I'm not a placeholder, and I'm sure as hell not waiting around for someone else to decide my worth. Sometimes I think about that night in Eleanor's living room, about the moment when I pressed play and watched David's world implode. People ask if I regret it, if I wish I had handled things more quietly, more privately. The answer is no, not for a second. David had been planning to discard me quietly, efficiently, in a way that would preserve his reputation and leave me holding the bag for our failed marriage. He thought I was too small, too insignificant, too temporary to fight back. He was wrong about everything. The last I heard, he was working at a mid-tier firm in another city, his partnership dreams permanently derailed by the scandal that followed him like a shadow. Rebecca had indeed cheated, with a judge no less, and their messy breakup made the legal community's gossip mill for months. Eleanor sent a Christmas card last year, a stilted attempt at reconciliation that I threw away unopened. Some bridges are burned for good reason. These days, I wake up in my lake house to the sound of birds and rescue dogs, make coffee in a kitchen where I never have to worry about impressing anyone, and go to work helping creatures who deserve better than the hand life dealt them. It's not glamorous, but it's real in a way my marriage never was, and every day I remember that I am not temporary. I never was. I am exactly as permanent as I choose to be. I